Welcome to Artist Trauma. We are doing Gustave Flaubert's A Simple Heart from this short collection of three tales. Um, yeah, so I chose
And you
this
said
one.
we'll do the rest of them soon. I mean, I'm not getting rid of it, so.
Yeah, we might do the rest of them. The rest of them are kind of weird compared to A Simple Heart. Like they're like one of them's a fantasy story that's like just very fantastic, and the other one is like a retelling of Salome. You know,
I was reading about that. I was having trouble picturing Flaubert and these things.
yeah,
Like,
Yeah, it's very hard. It is surprising to find the same writer who is the preeminent realist, um, who writes this very slow, drained, minute account of this poor woman's life, and is at the same time writing these sort of high fantasy stories. But to me, actually, I find it very understandable because at least with like Madame Bovary, so much of that book is the contrast between the fantasy and the reality. And some of the best passages of Madame Bovary are these moments when, Emma Bovary is
hmm.
imagining like, oh, I'll elope with this man, and we'll have we driven by four white stallions across seas and mountains, and we'll end up in this sepulchral white cities, and like so on and so forth. And it's like, and then like the guy doesn't even come. This, so there's like these bitter contrasts of fantasy and reality, and in general, like Flaubert is a writer of disappointment.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, or just. I mean, obviously, this is my first foray into Flaubert, but in this one, a writer of um, not just one absence. It's like, oh, there's absence from this angle. Oh, and there's also absence from this other angle. It's like there's a lot of writing about absence. Um, there's a couple years he doesn't linger on anything. I mean, it's funny because like, Anna was like, "Oh, it's so slow, so slow," and then it was like this one. I actually was like, "No, this is just like it's so condensed. The whole life is just 40 pages. It's like kind of the opposite of what I hear from Madame Bovary."
well, Madame Bovary, I don't. I'm just gonna say, like, maybe there's a degree of bias or something in me, like, I just find that book to be like the high point of Western civilization.
Is there that one?
I don't know how anyone could complain about that object. It's just so premier. Um, but
Watch
like
me be in between. It's like my partner's like it's a little boring, and you're like it's the greatest thing, and I'm like 7 out of 10.
and you will deserve both of our contempt. Um,
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like Anna doesn't think it's great. It's just more of a personal
no, I
pacing.
get it. I
Uh,
get it. I
Whereas this one,
um,
I mean, I found it kind of violently paced.
yeah, it's okay. So just so the listener
Yeah.
knows, it's basically just talking about this poor woman of peasant stock, more or less, who, it goes over. They see the course of her life where she begins, basically her parents die. She's sort of a farmhand here or there for a while. Eventually, she finds her way into service at this, middle class woman's house, a middle class widow's house, and basically not there's no like big startling event in the course of the novel. It's just this, very simple hearted woman, um who's just
Well, I mean, okay,
incredibly
like just in
endearing.
terms of facts, like she's dumb as fuck, and it's great. Like, like it's
Yes.
beautiful. She has a deep soul, but in terms of facts, she's hilariously dumb.
Yeah, like that. There are just so many. I mean, someone just describe like is telling her like this is how you'd this is what's in this particular like geography book with like these big nice pictures for back then. And she was a little bit amazed by this because no one had ever taken the time to explain how to read a book to her. um
and it shows two things. First, that in her class of employer, it's just it doesn't come up as much. And then the other one is that she's not curious about everything. She has her desire, obviously. She's a full-fledged human who's great. But there's certain things that just like don't show up to her as important as like things to do, within her purview, really.
Well, it's she's somebody who's just I don't know, she's only been around in the world she's been around. Like basically it's like
Yeah.
okay, I mean she's gotten almost no education. She had to work, rather hard since girlhood onward. It's I mean, okay, like what are things I want to say about it, like the idea of her having like some broader ambition would almost feel like that would just make her life worse because there's no way she can get that. Um,
No, she has yeah, right, because she has her own. I mean, the parrot becomes. I mean, what Flaubert is doing here is really brilliant with the imagery of both humor and deep pathos. Because like it's funny, but you're not supposed to laugh. I don't think.
well, it's a humor tinged with sadness. Like there's okay, just early in the book, we have the bit where she goes to one of these peasant fairs and she's amazed at like every the violins playing and all the people dancing around and all the things being sold. Like it's amazing to her. And there's some guy who comes up to her and like starts giving her like some buys her some gifts and I don't know, gingerbread, whatever like you do when you're trying to seduce a peasant woman back in like the 1820s.
Whatever they did in
uh,
but excuse me, like it's a horrible phrase, but in Michigan we would say "butt fuck nowhere, France." It's
yeah.
like it's not, yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, and
Agree.
and there's something funny about the fact that oh, he walks her home with the understanding that she understood, thinking that she understood why he had bought the presents. And like there's something funny about like that, and like the fact he
Yeah,
goes, he tries to start kissing her, it brings her to the ground, she just starts screaming, and he scampers off, in fear, and it's like it's a funny kind of exchange, but it's also
yeah,
really
it's like
sad.
it's sad because she's kind of brutalized. Well, I think that's just foreshadowing for the main trauma. Like that's kind of a small event for her, but it does show how a lot of her things become foreclosed as life goes on. It's the book shows how love gets foreclosed on, like her foray into it's kind of silly. I mean, he lets the she lets the attempted rapist kind of seduce her because he's kind of just a blockhead anyway. These are kind of like it's kind of Flaubert's kind of like peasants will be peasants is sort of his stuff here, and then it ends kind of tragically, but there's still that foreclosure, like that kind
I'm
of
gonna get that.
avenue gets
I'm
closed
gonna give
down.
that guy a little bit of credit. Of it's not when she started screaming, he left. So I don't know if he was if it's a it was, and he was thinking, oh,
No, it was
he
more.
knows what's going on here.
I
So
think I would say it was
just a
more.
little bit of credit to the guy, a tiny bit. He's not a good guy, but he's
I
not a
think you're right.
heinous guy. Okay.
Well, it's not what's his name from A Streetcar Named Desire of, this
Yeah,
is
family.
this is fumbling around.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and I could
exactly.
that particular kind of heinous person, I don't he doesn't really belong in a Flaubert novel, like a full blown rapist. That belongs in a Zola
No,
novel.
you're totally right. He's just kind of, I mean,
He's just
Flaubert does such a great job of showing people farting around.
yeah, I mean like because like then like they start like having a sort of a romance going on.
Right.
And it's like and he's just talking about how like yeah, my parents like they sold they paid for someone else to do my military service, but I'm still scared that I might end up getting into the service. And it's
Yeah.
sad that like it's described how she's basically interpreting his cowardice as a fear of missing her. um as in like you taking away
That's kind of I wrote ship's passing in the night.
How's that?
Because they're I wrote ships passing in the night on
But
my.
explain what you mean by that.
Oh, well, his desire and fears are going one way, and they briefly meet hers for a moment so she can misrecognize what it is, and then they pass.
Yeah, yeah,
And by the way, I'm kind of doing a little violence to the text. Something that the crassness of the way I've been talking about this is false is that Flaubert is giving every single person humanity. This is pretty deep, and everything is very geometrically aligned in the text so that there's always a classical sense of premonition, but what's very fresh and new is that the plot is not just an arc. It's all over the place. It's more like a rhizome than it is it's linear in a sense, but it's all over the place in terms of intensity. It's
yeah.
fantastic.
It actually the work it reminded me of on this reading was Lady Sarashina's "As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams,"
Yeah.
because it had that same like episodic flavor over the course of a lifetime, where it's more just like, yeah, here are the episodes. Now one thing very different, by the way, about this is Flaubert is actually giving you the most important points of Felicité's life. He isn't just sort of like, oh yeah, and 10 years later, I went to a temple, and now I actually had a husband and children with me, or something. Because that was the thing so fucking weird about that book
And then
was,
you don't know the guy, then it's like it's been 10 years since my husband's been dead. And you're like, he died? You're like, I didn't even know you had one.
yeah,
You
just
know,
like, so here
very
is a
strange
very
writing. Yeah.
Western, emphasis on the actual important crap, or at least
But
on Jeff. So
well, I think the most, I think that one of the things that's beautiful about the book is that, and I think it's a book because it felt like I read a 200-page novel. I mean, it's just this thing is so condensed, um, that it's sort of walking on a tightrope, trying to make it work critically for him. Um, and there's no issue. He just, everything hits at the right time. It's still very perfectly paced. Um, I think that one of the most interesting things in the first couple pages is how people are introduced. Like people get introduced and then a page later they get one more mention and then they like never get another mention or show up at the end. But the nephew, I don't think he's named. He's just the nephew at the beginning. And then he gets named when he runs through the woods to greet her. And I thought that was really powerful in a weird way, where it's like when she first meets her criminal family that's trying to steal stuff, there's sort of an undifferentiation between the family members, right? They're described, but it's like you kind of think of this family, pack of criminals. And then when the nephew begins the relationship, you're kind of thrown back to have to differentiate them.
yeah, let's see on that one. I would okay, first off, I just want to take issue with like the criminal characterization. They are criminals, as in like they send the nephew off to the house to visit Felicite, to basically, and always like, make sure you bring something back, like a bar of soap or some salt or a bag of sugar. And it's like it is theft, but it's like it's petty theft. Like they're not career criminals. They're just like,
Right.
yeah, just a little bit extra, just something to tie us over a little bit more. Like it's not, again, like a full blown criminal is not something that's too dramatic for Flaubert.
Well, it's kind of like if you're walking by a panhandler and they go, "Hey man, can I get a couple bucks?" And then they're like, "Come on, man, let me get one more."
Yeah,
It's not like okay, sure. It's nothing. It's not all that big of a deal.
yeah, it's so
Way there.
bad. Like there is one proper criminal, and that's like Monsieur Bollinger, or I forget the guy's name.
Yeah.
Um, who's like, who actually committed embezzlement. and like had like an illegitimate child by some other woman somewhere.
And
um
it was like kind of implied, it's kind of a Christian
Play.
implication, right? Where he's the one who kills himself, right?
Yeah, he as in like there's whispers that he killed himself, and then it turned out, yeah, he did kill himself. And so like
That was a weird, funny sentence too. It's like there were whispers of a sin. It was true.
like that really was just it did surprise, but you did get that sense of like the building revelation of that. um
I think that like the criminal aspect of him was really funny because it did remind me of, so SNL sometimes they do Trump and he goes out there and they have this running joke which is in this format where the guy who's playing Trump goes, they think I did a lot of things, but I've never done fraud. I've done so many things. You know, arson, I've done a lot of theft, fraud, probably. So he says he admits the crime later. It's like, I've never commit fraud. I've commit embezzlement, treason, fraud, and then
yeah, no,
throws
yeah.
it in. It kind of reminds me of the joke here of like, well, there are cries and whispers of the thing that was also true. And it's like, it's a great interesting notion. I think it sort of puts Flaubert above Balzac in terms of versatility. Um, because I go to Balzac and I get this sort of flurry of intensity and in just events and just like brilliant descriptions. But with Flaubert, I can't predict what he's gonna do on the next page. The bull scene is really traumatic. I mean, it's so out of nowhere.
Yeah, like that's the scene where Felicite and Madame Mowbray, her employer, and her two children are like going along, and they're just having a nice time out in the meadows, and they see some cows, and it seems fine, but there's a bull. There's a bull waiting. That turns out, and it's like she's able to keep. They want to start running, but she realized, no, no, don't run. Just walk quickly. Don't startle it that way. And then eventually,
Yeah.
as it gets closer and closer, galloping at them, he starts throwing heaps of dirt at its face. And like what's really like great about this scene, like right afterwards, it's said like that Felicite did not realize that her actions had been heroic, even though they were talked about widely in the town.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, what a simple-hearted woman. Like she just wanted to do the right thing. She's not basking in like some great glory afterwards. It's like she just wanted to, save the family. Um, like that was just very endearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
but
think
that
on that
sequence was
point,
like just like a
is it
good bit of characterization.
it was good and it was a great scene and it also was a great, you're exactly right, bit of characterization. Another thing it does is I think it, you already said it, but it betrays why the thing is called a simple heart, is that like Felicity's like goals and desires, what makes her really lovable for me as a character in literature is that she doesn't care how she's seen by like some big other or by society at large. I mean, she has, this is sort of the climax of having the parrot in the altar. Maggot and I mean, it's beautiful, right? The image of the maggot, the parrot falling apart in the on the festival altar. Oh God, it just shows that she's sort of
Yeah, I'd be like, what are all the
doesn't care.
yeah, what are all the things? Well, one thing she doesn't even know, like it's maggoty at that point. Um, but it's like,
Yeah, because she's blind.
yeah, but it's like, what are the things she's valued in her life? It's like, she cared about this guy who kind of, who was not that great, but she thought was like genuine. He's not that great of a judge of character. She really loves her mistress's children, like just dearly loves them. She eventually loves her mistress, and because in part because like they really bond over like the death of some of the children. It's one of the children, Virginie. She loves this parrot. And like just wants and like loves its image and like gets it stuffed and basic and thinks of it like, and to me I think that is like the most touching thing in the entire book. is just how like she thinks it's connected in her mind, her parrot, with the Holy Spirit. You
Yeah.
know, like all of those like associations of sacredness and beauty are attached to this last form of human affection in her life. It's just I like this. That's just beautiful. Also a nephew she loved, but it's like, yeah, it's like she's just an earnest person. It's just like it's sad that the world is so crappy.
And arbitrary. I mean,
Yeah,
he
it's just
goes to
so
Cuba,
fucking arbitrary. Um,
dies,
you know,
and
it's
you're
like
like, well, that makes sense. It's Cuba. And then you're like, oh, that's sad.
yeah, like it's like her fucking cousin nephew, who she loves dearly, goes off to like a big trip across the ocean as a sailor, and he dies because he got yellow fever. He goes to the hospital and he gets treated by bleeding 4 times for it. As in, they just keep giving the same treatment because no one, I guess, marked off the list of like, oh, he's been treated now. And he died immediately. So it's just because of grotesque bureaucratic incompetence. Uh,
Yeah.
like that's
That's
why he
also
fucking
a little
dies.
funny. I mean, again, it's a little funny, but not in a ha-ha way. It's not a joke.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, it is fun.
sheer
Well,
pathos.
yeah, it's like it's funny of just like, and I mean, it's like that joke I said of like a couple of podcasts ago that I came up with of it's funny how you forget everything you care about and have nothing left in the end.
Yeah, that's a simple like the Twitter books and movies explained badly. And so like Lion King is like legitimate son fights to restore a monarchy. And like that's the bad like, books explained badly of a simple heart. But it does work though. It's it's true. You lose everything in this way that she does, where it's like I think that what's really deep about this story is it's not that you can kind of predict the event in the sense that like, okay, this person someday will die, right? But you can't really predict a time and a place. And I think that that's important here, is that you can't predict on the page when someone's going to die, and you can't predict how it's exactly going to happen. You have little whispers, but it has to come across suddenly on some level.
Yeah, it is actually. It's always actually it almost always hits suddenly. Like a little bit of whispers, but it's like and like the most I don't know, like well one of the ones like that where I guess her first big loss is like that that boy that she loved um from the festival. And he, it's like he says, I'm gonna go off to town to like check on something, and I'll be back in like a week. And then like she meets his friend there, who says like, oh, he's like gone and married a girl, so he won't get drafted. A wealthy woman, so he'll get drafted. Like, like that was just such a savagely random thing to have happen, Um,
That's a great way to describe it. Savagely random. It's like, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense because he was worried about it, but I guess that sucks. Okay, moving
or
forward.
or like I mean, and of course, I think probably in my mind the most heartbreaking one is just like when the poor parrot dies like in front of the fire. Like they're just having a nice time in winter, like sitting
Ah,
by the fire, and she goes out to get more wood, and he comes back in, and its mouth is hanging open, it's upside down, like from its perch, it's
it's
died from a stroke. The poor
it's also still kind of funny. I mean, every single death is also just a little funny. I mean, except for obviously the little girl's death is not that funny.
Yeah,
That one's just
there's
sad.
nothing funny about that. That's just so
That
fucking
one
sad.
was just devastating. That one was it was just sad. But when the guy leaves him because and then marries a woman because he's afraid of getting drafted. There is kind of a funny inversion in Desire where before it's like, oh yeah, he has this irrational fear that he's going to get drafted or whatever. But after he actually goes and marries another woman to avoid getting drafted in another way, you're kind of like, oh, maybe he just didn't like you. Like at that point, it suddenly flips around to where it's like maybe Yeah, maybe he wasn't that into you.
Yeah, I do.
It's kind of hard to tell though. I don't know. I can't really make up
Yeah,
my
I'm
mind.
I'm gonna say that it's a little bit hard. I don't know the logic of French
Mhm.
conscription in the 1800s. So,
No. And also, we
um,
don't know the French language. We're reading a translation, so I can't get into the implications at at the sentence level of what's happening in the same way all the time.
yeah, yeah, that too. Like, as in, like that really is the paltry excuse. Um, so so that's but it's just such an amazing work of art. Um, yeah, but getting back to just more stuff. Oh, also just like one thing that's just sort of fun about the book, and this again
Mhm.
more sad, is just sort of the background unpleasantness of the world. How
Yeah.
it's like her first employers are like very bad to her, after her parents die. She then finds another one who like her and treat her better, but it's then immediately mentioned, and her friends envied her because she was so well liked by her employers. It's just like,
And you're like, wow, this place sucks. This is like
yeah,
a horrible time to be alive.
the world is bad. Um,
It reminds me of like yeah, that's just true. And like there is stuff from like I read the introduction. Like I didn't finish it because it was fine. It was just like the best part about it is Flaubert's own writings. His own writings about his life are great. Um, but I didn't realize like I love it when you find a great writer and it's like, oh yeah, this came out, it was lampooned, and then the next thing comes out and it's lampooned, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of people who are just fucking wrong all the time. But he also had some hardship that showed the background terribleness of his era. I kind of forget what happened to him, but he wasn't as well off as he could have been in a sense.
yeah, I remember reading a short description of his life, and I remember feeling like that's not a lot to have happen in a life. It just felt lacking in terms of event. And it just sort of it felt kind of like one of his stories of just like, yeah, it wasn't bad, but you know, it was also kind of fucking pointless. Like always, just lacking in just some kind of fundamental happiness. I mean, like one thing which I feel like is relevant in a broad way is a quote from Flaubert that apparently somebody reports this from a conversation from him that
Yeah.
he felt that in some level, like despite the fact that he had slept with many women, he felt on some level like he was still a virgin because he had never really possessed a woman on a spiritual level. That all he had had before then was just mattresses. Um, which just feels very much like, yeah, that's Flaubert's kind of world. Like you
That
never
man would
really
say
get
that.
what you want, even when you get what you want. Um, it's all
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. I would recommend, by the way, just if you want to have fun, this is not relevant to the story. One thing that's nice about the introduction for this penguin one's a pretty good introduction because he wrote out his dreams and they're kind of silly. Like one of the dreams is about a great forest full of monkeys. And so it's a little more wild in the dream and imagination life. The introduction makes a good argument, probably in line with what you're saying, that there's a lack of events about his great imagination. That he had a really tact for imagining things, as any great writer should, but that Flaubert particularly had a very large imaginative world that we have in his writings. So, take it what you will. It comes through in the book, obviously, because
yeah,
great fiction writer. Um, yeah, I can see that, but on your point, like, yeah, that's a very Flaubert. You know, as is his life, so is his story.
yeah. So what's some other stuff we want to
Oh, I
Get
just think one of the death scenes was great. Want to just go over the death of the nephew is fantastic. I mean, it's sad, but the writing's great. So it's Madame Aubain who is counting the stitches on a piece of knitting, put her work to one side, opened the letter, gave a sudden start, and then lowering her voice and looking very serious, she said, "They're sending you bad news. Your nephew," and then there's an ellipses. Next paragraph, Victor was dead. That was all the letter said. And
and he
it's just
hadn't.
very perfectly outlined.
Yeah, it's like the fact that like she hasn't heard from him in 6 months. It's mentioned. Um, and it's like her first bit of news is just because like she's learned that she learned from, I don't know, the tavern keeper that his boat had arrived in Havana, because of because he had read in the newspaper. So it's like almost the most impersonal fact. It's just like, okay, his boat arrived. You don't know anything about him specifically, but you know his boat arrived. Um,
Yeah.
and then you get like this, like just sad detail. Um, but
I didn't actually know the association of Cuba and cigars went back that far.
yeah, I didn't know
There's kind
that.
of a funny thing where she imagines, because of its association with cigars, Felicite imagined Havana to be a place in which the only thing people did was to smoke. And she pictured Victor walking amongst crowds of Negroes in a cloud of tobacco smoke. And it's a good image. I don't know. It's
That's a good
funny and
image. I
kind
mean,
of
in a similar connection. I mean, as in like that's a very sort of childish sort of image. Um,
yeah.
and like when you get even more childish when she goes to Monsieur Brouet, Bouret, and it's like, can you show me where Havana is on the map? And he like goes and he's looking at longitude lines and explaining different things, and he says, and then he like just points to some part of on the just some point on the map, and it's like, well, there he is. And she's like, can you show me the house where he's staying? I was like, that's not what you. And of course, Monsieur Bouret, the embezzler, as we find out later, is the kind of jackass who just like dismissive of that and just like laughs at her for being so simple minded. But it's also like it's so endearing. Like Flaubert even goes so far as to say like for all she knew, she would have been shown a portrait of him, you know, there. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I mean it's one of the most standout paragraphs in the whole book. I mean, obviously it's great. It's like we got the bull scene, we got that, we got some of the death scenes. But if we piece it together, every single page is a standout scene because it's so condensed. And so I have a question for you about the form of this long short story, which is, so at some point, I'm sure Flaubert sat down and went, "What type of book is this going to be?" And at least even in passing, like, is this a 300 pager? Or is this a short one? What for you makes this have to be the length it is? Like, why did he decide this length, and why does it work this way instead of it having been a full length novel?
well, I feel one part of it um, is that why it couldn't have been a whole lot longer is, well, frankly, she's just a little bit too simple minded. And it's like there's just not enough like complications to her spiritual life in order to justify that. So like when I think of Madame Bovary, it's like she has a very complicated, internal life. Like she's remembering going to a ball. She's there's these high fantasies of youth. There's these disappointments with her love. There's becoming religious for a while. Like these are not things you can imagine Felicite doing. She can be like struck by like the beautiful images she hears at church when she brings the daughter Virginie there, but that is the
Yeah.
high level of her intellectual life. and you can't really, and then the other part of it is you can't really imagine dear Felicite doing anything more to fill in the pages. It's like, yeah, she's a very dutiful servant who becomes attached, and I don't know, like her living the itinerant life just doesn't fit her. Like she doesn't feel like a creature that can migrate.
No,
Um, and
no. I think you're spot on. I mean, in a sense, she reminds me of my. It's not maternal, like actual like blood related grandma, but my kind of my mom's real mom died when she was 11, and she was partially raised by this other woman who was I always knew as Grandma Ruth. And Grandma Ruth, if you talk to her after she turned 90, she said she loved you and that's great. And then she said, "I'm really excited to die because I'm really old and I'm ready to go home to Jesus." Which is pretty literary to begin with. I really like that. And so, because she's like talking and then, eventually she'll circle back to how much she is proud of you and loves you. And then she'll circle back to how much she's ready to go home to Jesus. And then she loves you. I mean, that's kind of what Felicite is like, right? Like, it's like, if you talk to her, you're going to get into these circles because I don't think she has a lot to say, you
well,
know?
one advantage I would say Felicite has in this situation is she wouldn't repeat herself. Um, and
She just be quiet.
yeah, she'd just say a few words and then she'd be done. And another thing about is
Yeah,
she she's not religious or mystical particularly. Like there are certain stories that like alight her, and she probably
yeah.
thinks and hopes she goes to heaven, but like that's not really something that the book cares about in any significant way. Like the myth, like for her it's more just like, yeah, she just loves hearing about, the Tower of Babel, or about, Jesus healing the blind, and just the image of the Holy Ghost, and just all of these things. Like this is how she takes her religion. It's almost in a literary, well, actually in a childlike way again, of like,
Yeah. I think it's childlike. I also think there's an enjoyment that I would maybe argue is interpassive, which is like, okay, like I don't believe in a God because I mean, well, it's a long story, but like I don't have good evidence. I have arguments. I've thought about it. We talk, I just, but I jump into reason, right? I jump into using my brain and the research I've done and the lack I've found. But, there's a certain enjoyment I get when you read about a character who's like, they just like uncritically do a thing. And it's like, oh, that's kind of nice to just uncritically like parrots. Cool. Oh, just uncritically like, and not in a way, because often we would phrase that as a person is, not very smart, or we would kind of make fun of that person in a lot of times. But that's where the joy of the story comes, is that Flaubert gives her center stage.
well, there's a childlike sincerity to it.
Yeah.
And actually, well, actually, just another point about, could you make this book into a full length novel? And on a certain level, you could say, yeah, he did that with Madame Bovary. It's just the Felicite character is named Charles Bovary, and he gets about as much screen time in a sense as Felicite does. But
Oh, that's a great point. He gets his 40 pages, but it's spread out throughout the whole novel.
yeah, and it's like, yeah, but the rest of the times on, dear Madame Bovary. So it's just a little bit funny in that way. Um, to think of it like, oh
I
yeah,
think that's a good. I think that's a good reason. Why it had to be the length it is based on the main character's experience of reality. I think another reason is also that this might not be a reason, but it might be a result. Is that if you're going to condense life, like like the longer a novel is, metaphorically, the life is less condensed.
yeah.
The story of my life in 8 million pages is almost a paraphrase of my life itself. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
so my
as
took
in you
8 billion
can't
pages.
like you can't hold it as a single unit. Um,
Yeah, whereas I think your comparison to Lady Sarashina is just so spot on because we really have to do a lot of work if we're going to write the story of a life and it's going to be under 100 pages. That's, oh, well, then what do we include?
yeah, and it's also there's just like all the episodes more or less have that thematic unity of loss. Not all of them are that way, and like there's a little bit like the one actually happy episode in the story is when I think it's Virginie when she's young. She gets a little bit sick, so they have to go take her out to the country. Oh no, out to the coast. To spend time in the sea and like, it's just like, hey, it's really nice out here. Like we go down to the meadow and it's pleasant, and we see that shining bowl of the sea, and it's so nice when the fishermen come home and they kiss their wives, and they're bringing in their baskets of fish still quivering, and it's like that's just like it's a great set of images of like this very tranquil uh existence. And it's you just feel so bad for Felicite that that's all she gets in this life. Just just give the dear girl a little more than that, a little more than that. But
Well, I think, I mean, isn't there sort of a, so I don't read, yes, on one hand, yeah, like give her more joy. On the other hand, I also don't read it as a tragedy. Like, I don't read the story of her life as like this. I mean, obviously, I read it existentially as like, oh my gosh, this is the whole life. But I don't, even though on the sense of just the real, like her life sucks ass by the end. Like she's got this dead parrot, she's like blind and she's just living alone. There is still a sense that it was like a worthwhile time
yeah,
and
that's a
not
good point.
just sad.
Yeah, as in
I mean, am I wrong? Did you read that as just sad at the end, or did you kind of have a similar
well, there's
thought?
there's a trim it's a mixture of things. On the one hand, it's like, yeah, like she has a very sad life. Like she very little of the time does she ever get like these really deep emotions. As in a lot of her life is just sort of like, yeah, what happened in 1925? Oh, we had the front door redone. What happened in 1927? That was the year we had like the some of the shingles came down. It killed a passerby. That's just that's like
Yeah.
her existence is just this dullness for a long time. But there is a sense of like, yeah, here's a really sincere human being, and like there is something still beautiful and tender about her life. I like to contrast it with other works we've done, like Eugene O'Neill. It's like she doesn't have that kind of disaster. She's not like racked with guilt and frustration and despair and self-loathing like those characters are. She's still just a good person.
No, and I think she would say something utterly boring to them, which would be like, well, just, repent and move on. And it'd be like, eh, it's just like the whole story would die with, yeah, just, repent to God and pray and say your Hail Marys and, bye. And then she just leaves or something. It's like,
Well,
there's no
well, one thing
content,
is,
there's no repression or anything. There's just, yeah, I confessed and then I moved on and life is good. And there you go.
well, one thing
Kind of
about it is
nice.
I don't even feel she's religious enough to do that. I feel like she just sort of look at these people like like Edmund and Jamie and all that, and just feel like dumb bewilderment, not even understanding like what is happening over there, and just furiously wanting to get away. Like, I
Yeah,
don't.
exactly. Because she'd be like, these are all just like aggressive men. I'm gonna go now.
Yeah,
Bye.
yeah.
And the yeah, it's funny. I think I think it's a deep contrast. I think there's also something culturally. I think that a lot of American playwrights at this time are a little more. They're expecting a lot from life, or at least the characters are expecting a lot or being really let down a lot. Whereas I think part of the point from this story is that she's not expecting the moon.
Well, one thing about her, yeah, is like she's not smart enough to have those kinds of ambitions.
No,
She's not smart
right.
enough to be tortured by the things that are beyond her grasp. I mean, that's the whole death of a salesman is like, yeah, I had this big dream of like this is my life would be as a salesman, and nope, that's not happening for you or your sons. Same thing with Streetcar Named Desire. It's like I'm forgetting her name, but the Southern Belle, who's just like who has this idea of chivalry and all of that, and like, nah, that's not your life now, honey. Um, Blanche, Blanche. Um, so she doesn't have that kind of ambition. She doesn't have
No.
she's just an earnestly good person who wants to do nice things and values the people around her. Um, and that's kind of it. Um, I guess one
Yeah,
issue
and
is you can't really write a novel about somebody who doesn't have ambitions. Um, there's just not enough to
it
like.
reminds me of. No, you're right. Like there's a Family Guy sketch, and I forgot what movie it was, but it was like, oh, I'm more bored than the time I saw this movie, and it does the little vignette,
Cutaway.
and it does the cutaway that they're famous for, and then it's just like they're just talking and nothing's happening, and then Peter Griffin just screams, "There's no conflict." So I think that Flaubert knows there's not going to be this conflict in her brain that we get from all the other stuff we've most of the other stuff we've read. Obviously, that's another point where it lines up with Lady Sarashina. Is Lady Sarashina doesn't have these giant existential conflicts. She has them, but they're muted and smaller and not as dire. They're just sort of things are happening. So the view of an event in Flaubert becomes really crucial since we're not going to get psychology. There's just not much psychologically to talk about in that.
Yeah,
You
she's
know?
not twisting herself into knots. It's just like I really love my nephew. I'm really worried about my nephew. Hey employer, I know you're worried about your daughter. Like I'm worried about my nephew. Like that's kind of it's a deep emotional life in the sense of she really does love her nephew, but that's kind of what more are we gonna say? Like there's a Somerset Mom story. I forget the name of it now. I apologize, but it starts off saying, "I wonder if I can do it." Oh, but I'm really going to try. And then he starts telling the story about this nice young man who, gets crippled but is like good-hearted, nice to other people around him, and so on and so forth. And like at the end of the 5 pages, he's like, "Well, I'm not sure if I've done it. If I actually made the life of a truly good person, interesting." Uh, um, which I don't feel
Yeah.
like that's quite the right attitude. Somerset Mom, good people do good things. Like Einstein is a good person and did things that were interesting. Abraham Lincoln was a good man and did things that were interesting. But there's a
Yeah, I
point
like.
there.
I think Abraham Lincoln's character really shined through it when he was the vampire slayer. That was the one where Abraham Lincoln was the most virtuous. I'm just kidding,
No,
obviously.
I know. I just feel.
But no, I
Uh,
mean, I think there is that is actually if you put it up there, the interesting person who's good. I think this is another example of you can have interest and deep feeling without having neuroses.
mhm.
Like that's another point where Balzac would just be like, "What's the story without neurotic people?" That's novels. To for Balzac is, I mean, you can't. I mean, you would have not one Balzac story without neurotic tendencies.
Yeah,
Whereas, or oppressional, or whatever you want to say, without some psychological impurity in the
yeah, like
characters, here it's
yes,
fine.
some kind of the thing is about Felicite is she's too laid back for a Balzac novel. Um,
That'd
it's
be
like
horrible.
it's like all the other characters. It's just like, oh God, I just need that woman. Give me that Jewess, or oh, my daughters who are sucking my blood. I have to sell everything I can just so that they'll pay me the time of day. Um,
But I must give them all the money for them to have the dresses.
yeah, it's
You know?
like
And
this,
Felicity would be like, just don't do that. That's stupid, you know.
and it's like there's no. It's like there's these violent desires of Balzac that there are like tender feelings in Flaubert, incredibly tender, and I'm just flat out crying, like sobbing at the end of this story, and like
Well, isn't it more realistic? Not in the way, not in the subject of enunciation. Like the way a story is told is still going to be cut up in into different ways, but just the way the characters are presented. I mean, I've never read a Balzac novel and been like, that's how people are. I mean, like in Cousin Bette, it's like they literally devise a scenario to give someone an STD by having like a slave woman from the Americas raped so that she then passes it on to another person. I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is completely insane. Like, no one is like this. How would that even work? And it's like, it's so crazy. Like, I mean, it's just like, I'm sorry, the best word for Balzac is he's crazy. It's a crazy view of life. It's great, it's big, it's all over the place. But Flaubert's is a more like when go and I say I love you to Anna. I don't say I love you to Anna in a Balzac way, because then I'd have to be strangling them or something. Whereas like Flaubert, it's like no, love is love. It's fine. It's real. Like it's deep on it's deep enough on its own. You know.
well, one thing about is both of them have a I would say sort of in a sense a passive desire or passive attitude towards passion in a certain sense of on the one hand Balzac is like yeah passions are these things that like are inflict themselves on you and like control you and like like you don't it's like no you're just in the grips of it you're possessed like you are in a sense just the puppet of this passion while like Flaubert is like yeah like that happens and it also just sort of disappears like you get this violent desire and then it's Tuesday. Um,
Which is closer. It's closer to Chekhov,
yeah, it's
right? Like
Chekhov's
this
much.
is more Chekhovian type thing. I mean, he's before Chekhov. They're some almost contemporaries, but like they have more similarities, I would argue.
Yeah. Chekhov is actually yeah, that's interesting. Like on this spectrum, um, yeah, it definitely is closer to Chekhov. In what way, though? Beyond that, like for the Chekhov, it's like you do have these strong, passionate desires and but you're able to deal with them on a somewhat rational basis. It's just they also just kind of wreck your life. um as in it's like oh yeah I fell in love with her and my life has never been the same afterwards. I'm a shambles of a human being. More tea. um like that's sort of the Chekhov way of handling it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And whereas, like on the flip side, I mean, I would almost put Thomas Pynchon with Balzac, where it's like reality itself is sort of sometimes unhinged, um, and obviously there's differences in reality there, but like there is a like in the scene in the pension when she's like cartoonishly struggling to put on clothes. That just like similar scenes like that just happen all over the place in Balzac, where it's just like, yeah, and it's fine. Obviously, Balzac does that type of stuff a little better, but there is like a little bit of like the tediousness of performance there, where it's like, well, yeah, like this can be a crazy event or whatever, and it's silly, but it is a little surfacey.
well
Whereas anything in Chekhov and Flaubert, there's not really a lot of surfacey things happening.
yeah well like the problem. Let's see how do I contrast like with Pynchon it's like and I've only read a lot of Crying of Lot 49. um It's one thing I have to say is like I don't like Pynchon. I don't think he's that great of a writer. From like there's that one novella.
Yeah,
And like my feeling is like that scene, it isn't reality. It's meant to be like, oh, now we're doing a Saturday morning cartoon. And in the next sequence, we are doing a noir fiction scene. And the scene after that, we're into 18th century French drama. Like it's not about reality. It's just this sort of like pastiche of different forms.
surfaces.
Yeah,
It's surface. It's surfaces,
yeah.
and instead of
And like Balzac is like, yeah, he does outrageous stuff. Like he definitely does outrageous stuff, inarguably, but it's still just believable in its own terms. It's like, yeah, this is an event that I can believe in that universe. You could say impracticable to actually occur, but I feel that Balzac believes this is plausible, and that's what counts.
oh, you cut out. You there?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, your internet's been pretty bad today, but it's still been working. We're good.
Oh, okay, okay. So
Yeah, I feel like there is a surface thing in Balzac. I don't need to bring. I mean, I can bring a lot of writers that do this surfacey thing. I think the best Balzac I read, I can still sort of tell that he came from writing pulp. There's just that little thread of horror show, like the British phrase, everything became horror show. That's just a little reality TVE. It's just a little performative of of stuff. It's a little Wes Anderson-y, maybe would be more accurate. there's there's a little like constructedness to reality in Balzac. And you're right where it's believable, but I think it trends surfacey, like levels of intensity. People lose their control, they get back their control, they find a new object of passion. Whereas like I think Flaubert is more of an actual human person.
yeah,
Like it's just
yeah,
more, I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. You get the thread I'm picking up. It's
I
something.
mean, I don't. I mean, I definitely can see like there are scenes where it's like there's a lot of characters in Balzac where it's like I'm not so sure how many Votrons exist in the world. Yeah, I love Votron as a character. I'm on board with him, but I don't know how realistic this man is. Um,
He's like such a cartoonist, like, and then the mask comes off. Ha ha ha! Ha. You've got me again, you scallywag! And you're like, okay.
yeah, like Jack Collin. Yeah, oh, that.
Yeah, it's got the it's the Jacques Cousteau version of detective novels.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm gonna say like I'm on board with Balzac. I'm on board with him. I mean, I think there's a little. I mean, I will say, okay, I'll give him this. I'll say this is that Flaubert is like there is about Balzac's characters a little bit of like implausibility to them. Like to me, like Pere Goriot is like he's the loving, adoring father right up until the end of the novel, and it's like there's no hint of him like acknowledging, yeah, my daughters treat me like dirt. No, like just subtle cringe or sadness there throughout the entire book, which is
And
like,
then he explodes in an event, you know.
and it's like you need to come on, just give me a little hint here, a little hint there. You can't do that to me, Flaubert, Balzac. But Flaubert is like, no, it's consummately real. Every
It's
moment of
constantly
it.
real, and everything there is given you in hints. It's kind of like well, like, okay, so if something is there, like if Pere Goriot is going to explode, and finally admit the truth, then like, I mean, any good reader from any time in history is going to be like, well, then you're suppressing that in some way, whatever word you want to use. Like, there's got to be hints and whispers of it in reality.
Yeah,
Um, you know, just yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm saying this with love. I love that novel. The ending is just a riot. Looks like we have a little deathorama. It's like the best
There
joke
we
in
go.
all of Western
There we
history.
there we go. A
That
death-a-rama.
was
Um,
that was like I read that and I was like, that's it. That's the funniest thing I've ever read in my whole
that's the
life.
funniest dad joke in history, whatever that is.
So that wait, hold on, wait. I don't know who's watching, but we have to explain it. So in the Balzac novel, they have the dioramas, and then at the opening scene, there's a beautiful scene where they're all playing with the word diorama. Some of it doesn't translate very well, but they're playarama. They're going all over the ramas. They're playing. They're Obama Rama would be Obama Llama Rama. We can do it in English.
yeah, yeah,
And then at the end, there's just this moment. It's so over the top emotional for no like for some reason, but it's just so Balzac like at a 10 or a 12. And then one of the people in the house just like gives the guy a jibes like looks like we got a little death-a-rama as he's dying. And it's just
Jesus.
it just cuts the tension and you're suddenly just like you go from to like what? That's one of my favorite moments in Balzac, just personally, if you can't tell.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm on
Um
board with this. I'm on board with this. Uh,
yeah, I think in Flaubert, I think that what we're hinting at is sort of like I think there's a level of craftsmanship that Flaubert has
yeah,
that
yeah,
Balzac wouldn't give a shit about at all.
yeah. I mean, Balzac. Okay, I don't.
I mean, the man wrote 90 novels, It's like,
Yeah, so
okay.
some people are more about just getting them out there. Um,
And I think that's where I think Flaubert and Chekhov are more fruitfully together in a view of human subjectivity, but also, I'm not reading this thinking that Flaubert wrote it in an afternoon. It would almost be a betrayal if I learned that he wrote it in an afternoon, because part of the joy of reading it is to see how meticulously placed everything is. It just fits, it falls into place more.
yeah, let's see. But getting back more directly to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like is there really much more for us to say in terms of like concrete events or aspects of the book?
No, it's like I'm reminded of the philosophy. Okay, yeah, like I I don't have any more specifics, but I have some ways in which it's traumatic.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Let's get into that. Let's get that's
so
wrapping.
great, yeah, like the philosopher Graham Harman was arguing against a view of events where he was referencing, I forget, some other philosopher who said, you have so many events in your life, you just can't keep track of them. There's so many things happening to you, and it's just a multiplicity forever. And then Graham Harman is kind of like, no, I bet if you really thought about it, like there's a good 5 to 10 things that have happened to you in your life. And I'm just on that side. I don't go out like, oh my God, every day all these things are happening. I think like if I look at my life, it might be more than 10, it might be 20, but there's a meaningful amount of events that have happened that I can talk about.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. Of the sense of here's a human life in in all of its major events. Here's like everything that was significant, and it's acknowledging how much nothing there is in the middle there. I mean, I will say that, let's see, how do we put this? And one thing in particular about it is a lot of the all of the events in her life are out of her control, basically. Basically
Right.
the only thing she ever actually does that like counts is like getting employed. So you got like kind of one, two, three events there. Um, she doesn't like nothing else really happens. Um, Everything's like, yeah, yeah, your nephew, he died like off in Cuba. Oh yeah, your nephew. Oh yeah, she or no, Virginia. Oh yeah, she died like at the convent. And oh, you didn't get to see your nephew go off really. Like, you get kiss him goodbye. You just sort of wandered
She
around.
tried. That
Like,
one she
he
was
tried.
was actually shockingly active for that one. right? Because
Yeah,
she ran like 12 miles or something
yeah, and like
and then missed it. And I was like, no. I was sitting there like, no, she missed it.
yeah, it's like it's so sad. Like she really would love to have values she could pursue. Like it's clear like she would walk, miles and miles and like, work very hard for someone she loved.
Yeah.
Like, she does that. I mean, just for her parrot. Like, she walks all the way to, like across the country to like drop it off at the guy who's going to stuff it. Um, and that's just so that the parrot won't, be lost in the mail. Like, she could just send it to the mail, but she doesn't want to risk that. That's how much, spiritual engagement she has, but it's not towards like a meaningful value ultimately. Like it's a little bit, but barely. She actually gets killed on the way too. Um,
So for you, a more meaningful thing would be something that she had more action involved in.
no, no, it's in like I'm just saying like it's just unfortunate that this is her life, that there wasn't something that she could have pursued.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on one hand, like you're totally right, but on the flip side, like I found the book really calming.
No, I thought it
You know what I
was
mean? Like it is
no,
kind of like,
I
oh,
liked it too. I'm
I
not
don't have to
complaining.
have
I
giant
wouldn't change a
desires to
thing.
be content, you know?
I wouldn't change a thing about this book. I think
Yeah.
Flaubert created something perfect here. I'm just saying it's like I think in my attitude towards life, I think there's more like actions to do. I think there's more like things to pursue. But I totally see like yeah, there are people whose lives are just this way, and it's sad, very sad and touching. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I get the sad part, but I think for me, what's what's okay, obviously this isn't self-help, but like what is nice about it in the way for me that I was like, oh, that's really calming is like, it's not like the fact that I can't go and do a bunch of things. It's that like, at the end of writing a short story, working on a piece of music, working at the bookstore, taking the dog on the walk, and then trying to build something, working on an essay. At the end of the day, what's nice about reading this one is then you can kind of go, and then you rest it. Because it's like, I don't think like my problem is that I'm not like active enough, you know, or for not pursuing the values. The problem is to get things to slow down so I can sleep or whatever,
no,
you know.
I liked that aspect of
That's what I liked
it.
about the book.
I liked that aspect of tranquility
Yeah.
in so much of the book. Like I was on board with that, especially since I've been feeling busy lately also. It's like, okay, well here's a world where you don't have to put that much effort into things. That's great. Um uh, but I mean for me like
Not that, I mean, again, I'm sorry, like, not that I would ever want to live in this time and place. It would be awful and we'd be illiterate and
yeah, yeah, like,
dead from
there's no
malaria.
envy. There's no envy. But one thing I will say in the sense of like being on board with the novel, I'm sorry, I was attacked with hunger for some reason. Um, oh, okay, the trauma from the novel is for it just that incredible sense of sincere tenderness.
Yeah.
The sense of like really loving another human being or loving a parrot or just loving something that I found to just be such a rare quality to see pro- projected so completely. Um, I wish it
It's
weren't.
the least perverse work of fiction ever made. Because it's like if you put Celine, Journey to the End of the Night, or Malaparte as like the most perverse literature, or not Balzac, Naked Lunch Guy, William Burroughs on that side, then this would be the least perverse work of fiction I've ever read. Most honest, just kind of there,
Yeah,
most sincere.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's and it's like it's unfortunate that like this kind of Flaubert's attitude more or less is, yeah, this sincerity is is seemingly only possible to an illiterate, not to all illiterates. Like plenty of illiterates are disgusting and horrible in probably Flaubert's view, but like it, at least it strikes me that like, yeah, you have to not be one of those clever people if you're going to be this.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't that more of an era stereotype of Christian beliefs at the time too? You know, you fall into knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, like that is it does relate to Christianity. I mean, yeah, that is, the whole Adam and Eve story. And there's like a reason for that of like, yeah, you learn more about the world and you learn about some of the bad parts, and then people become cynical as a result. Um
Yeah.
so like there's a point. It's not like nonsense that he's talking there. I'm just saying it's like I would just like to see, you know, Flaubert present an intelligent person with that same simple-heartedness. Um, and you don't quite get that from him. Um, you don't quite get that from him.
I think okay. I mean, this is where we've sort of dated the piece, right? Like we've sort of like this like if I wrote this right now, you'd be like, yeah, I mean, okay, first of all, you would be shocked because it's fucking amazing. You'd be like, what the hell, Chris? But like, but you'd also be like, okay, this doesn't really align with like your belief. You know, you would have some questions about the era we live in and stuff. But also like I think there's a certain like dialectical issue the other way too, which is like if you talk to a blue collar person today who's literate but put in the same category as her, someone who works in a factory or something, you know, it's almost they do it almost in bad faith now. It's like, well, I'm just a country pizza lawyer. And you're like, okay, yeah, but you read the New York Times every day. It's like it's almost now a flip side reversal
Well,
thing where it's like, no, you can't pretend you're just a simple peasant folk when you're reading and watching all this media. No,
yeah, like you
that's
got
a false relation.
look, you left the Garden of Eden as soon as you opened TikTok. Um, you know,
Yeah, it's like there's like you can read the OnlyFans model you're looking at right now. you know? Sorry, I'm being silly, but there is like in modern
but
America,
even
it would
just
be
yeah, but it's also just like,
happening.
people aren't like full blown illiterates like she is.
Well, and if they are, we would just be depressed. I mean, when we meet an illiterate person in rural Ohio or in inner city Detroit, it's not like you're like a simple heart. You're just fucking sad and like, no, we don't have that. We need to fix that. You're not like, I mean, the story to tell is closer to the book, like, what is it, Five Children and It? Or a child, no, it's a child called It, where they like, just abuse a kid. And you're like, oh, this is depressing, but it's not that he has a simple heart or something. It just doesn't work. It wouldn't work today in that way. Um,
Yeah, so it's interesting that this kind of person isn't quite around this is in the same form. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
if
so
it was,
but
it'd be in
anyway,
bad faith and it'd be really funny. Or you could do it in a, I'm sure there's figures like this in Family Guy and South Park, but they're meant ironically.
yeah. So all right. So this is
Wait, no. Is there anything like this in South Park? I'm sorry. Hold on. Wait.
I don't
I
want
have
to
to take
fucking
that back.
talk about
That's a
South
stupid.
Park. I
That
don't
I
want
did
to
not know. That's a
fucking
terrible sentence. No, no. I'm sorry. That's a horrible. Uh, Scratch that from the jury record, from the thing, from the ledger.
yeah, it's all right.
The dumb
It's
thing to say.
okay. We're just talking. We're just talking. Um,
Um, we can stop recording in a second. Don't go away though yet.
okay. All right. Well, anyway, well, see everybody later. This is great.
Thanks, Ray.